Hey, this is Pastor Broadus from Reconcile Community Church, here with Pastor Todd from East North Church. I just thought it was important in view of just the public discourse around the issues of race to bring up some topics to talk about them from both a biblical and historical perspective. And so just a little snippet of why I thought that was necessary. You know, when I saw the outrage from that clip of the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, I saw two subtleties in the reaction. Now, generally there was a sense of outrage, sadness, grief, frustration, but there was a subtlety. Some people were sad, frustrated, angry, but not surprised. And there were some other folks who were very surprised that why would that happen? And not all the way around, but largely that fell along the lines of those who would be in solidarity with the African American experience, either are African American themselves or have some historical knowledge, and then largely those who were met with a sense of surprise would be those who maybe don't interface with the African American experience as much. And I thought, if we're going to reach any type of biblical unity, we have to at least have some understanding regarding where are we coming from. And so I believe those differences come from a fundamentally different view of history and how history is impacting the present day.
Yeah. Just to let everyone know, thank you for letting me do this with you.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it. And we were talking earlier. Along with that, I think it's important to think through and sort of like just say what's true. Like we have different ethnicities. God's created the world. It's not just white and black. There are all kinds of different ethnicities. Mm-hmm. And all of our ethnicities have histories. Yeah. So whatever history we learned in middle school and high school and beyond, I mean, I'm not going to say that wasn't true, but it was impacted with a worldview. Mm-hmm. And there's a big trend in at least pastoral circles to kind of go for like self-awareness. Like, you got to become more self-aware, understand yourself. And I think just in general, there might need to be like a movement of like ethnic awareness, like my personal ethnic awareness. Like I grew up with it was just white people. That was like the normal. I mean, it wasn't that there never were any black people, but like sort of my core experience relationally growing up was primarily white folks. And there was some history in my grandparents I learned that they had some racial bias, and they were pretty talking about people behind their back and like saying derogatory things from time to time. And I also observed my parents kind of go, that's not good, and we're not acting like grandpa and grandma. We're gonna do it a little bit differently. And that shaped me and opened me up to be like, okay, people of a different ethnicity are not enemies or bad people. They're different, and it's good to sort of like move forward. But as I've grown up, I've not become as aware. I'll own my own sort of like privilege, so to speak, where I haven't thought through the significance of how, in general, like society as we know it, American society, modern American society, has some built-in, often unseen, and in a lot of cases you got to fight to help people find it, ways that there's a system's been created that's easy for me because I'm white and I'm a man. Being a white man, it's a little bit easier. And then there are other people that are not, and sometimes it's ethnicity, sometimes it's gender too, that would cause it to be like, well, it's going to be harder because you're not a white man. So our ethnicity and our background and our experiences need some investigation, and we need some recognition about some of the things that have been built up and created, cultivated in our own lives, that cause us to think the way we think and interpret the way we see different things.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. We were just talking about how history, or your knowledge of history does affect the way you interpret. So someone can see the exact same thing or hear the exact same thing and interpret it in fundamentally a different way. And so I think that one thing to recognize is the struggle of equality and the fight for justice is rooted in the African American experience, fundamentally. From the beginning of the time here in what is America, there has been a fight for dignity, a fight for justice, and really a fight for the claims that we want to hold the faith of Christ high. Well, there's been a fight to say, well, let's do that. Mm-hmm. Let's not only talk about that. Let's actually do that. And so I remember when I was maybe elementary or middle school, I can't remember, but I remember my father. It was one February, and we spent a whole weekend watching a documentary that was probably 8 hours long. We watched a documentary of the history of the African American people, from slavery up all the way into the civil rights movement. And my father told me, son, you need to understand what has happened and how that still affects today. And so because of, I feel like I can give a really concrete example. Mm-hmm. So when I saw the video of the most recent shooting, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was, if he is found doing anything illegal or suspect, this will invalidate in some people's minds any claims to racial bias or justice. And I just want to explain that is not a new phenomenon. It's the idea that in order to get justice, one has to be the quote unquote perfect victim. Mm. And so in the civil rights movement, one of the linchpins was what happened to Rosa Parks, how she refused to give up her seat. But what many people don't understand is there was a Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks. Her name was Claudette Colvin. And she did the exact same thing. She remained seated, was arrested, and the civil rights leaders at the time, they looked at the case, but they found that there was some other issues, some perceived character flaws with her. And they said, well, we can't bring this one up because we already know.
They'll throw it out.
They'll throw it out, and they'll invalidate the whole claim because the victim has to be morally perfect. Which I'm just thankful that from a gospel perspective, that is not how Jesus views us, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Jesus doesn't look at people and decide whether they should have the dignity of being treated fairly based on their perfect track record.
Right, yep.
Because we know no one has that.
That's good. That's true. I think it's important to recognize, because it's human race, and this is also a theological point, our history will be laced with, as much as we might, early on, elementary school, middle school, your version of history is sort of like storytelling heroes, and the moral of the story is sort of like the experience that you get from it. And it's as if all of these people were like wonderful people who just happened to go through difficult things. But the reality of it is, like, our history, no matter what our ethnicity is that it's filled with flawed human beings that are both victims of sin and perpetrators of sin. And that leads to the reality, like we talked a little bit about family generations, sort of like in the Old Testament, God talked about that, like it's going to just trickle down. And there was some goodness for the fact that my parents had a better view of approaching at different ethnicities, to say to my grandparents and to me, like that's not appropriate. And so there's a breaking of a curse that can occur that I think that keeps going. But even if we find ourselves in a position where we think like, well, I've never been racist, and I've never, my parents were never racist. We don't need to believe that means we're flawless on our experience, because our entire historical experience, everyone we meet, the whole bloodline all the way back, filled with sinners, the recent bloodline that would populate our understanding of modern history, American history, there is a lot of racism, there's a lot of prejudice, and there's a lot of let's make it easy for one group of people, and then by that action we have made it difficult for other people. And if we're not aware if we're not currently aware of how that plays into how we view things, we're missing a huge piece to a puzzle, and we might find ourselves saying things like, I don't know what they're talking about, and I don't know, they're making stuff up, and I have none of that going on in my life. But the reality is we can't escape it because it's part of our history.